strain. Angels with rapture announce it, shepherds with wonder receive it. Sinner, oh, won't you believe it? Wonderful story of love. 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 Though you are far away, wonderful story of love. Still he doth call today, calling from Calvary's mountain, down from the crystal bright fountain, ye from the dawn of creation. Wonderful story of love. 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 Jesus provides a rest. Wonderful story of love. For all the pure and blessed, rest in those mansions above us, with those who've gone on before us, singing the rapturous chorus. Wonderful story of love. 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 I have heard of a land on a faraway strand, sing the wondrous love of Jesus, sing his mercy and his grace. In the mansions bright and blessed, he'll prepare for us a place. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. While we walk the pilgrim pathway, clouds will overspread the sky. But when traveling days are over... All right, so we're studying Abraham's story now, Genesis 12 through about 25. Why is Abraham such an important character? Okay. He is. We're going to talk about that a little bit at the beginning of class, his being the father of the faithful. We went from creation to Abraham in 11 chapters. And the life of Abraham is going to be given 13 chapters by itself. What is happening here that is so significant? One of the things has been mentioned. We're introduced through Abraham to faith and what faith looks like. But there's something more significant going on. That is certainly one of the tests that he did well on. We're going to see kind of the other side of that coin a little bit tonight, where he didn't do as well in another instance, which I think is how we recognize him as human, and we share something in common with him. But he is isolated from the sons of Noah, the descendants of the sons of Noah. That's where we got to Abraham from that story, right? We just got finished with Noah and the flood and the sons of Noah and the world being populated through the three sons of Noah. Now this man is isolated from the rest of the population of the earth because it is from his lineage that the promise made back in Genesis 3 is going to be fulfilled. It is from him that the seed is going to come. And so this is the beginning of the lineage of Jesus in terms of God being at work to make this happen and make it identifiable to us and make it clear. Abraham was not just the father of Israel. In fact, Israel was Abraham's what? Grandson. Israel was Jacob. The nation that arose from Israel is the nation of Israel. Abraham didn't just father the nation of Israel, but Abraham fathered many nations. And then more importantly, we learn in the New Testament that he fathered many nations spiritually. And that's even more significant. And so Abraham, was he under the law? No. Moses is not even on scene yet. This is long before Moses, long before the law of Moses has been given. We have in Abraham a patriarch. That is my granddaughter that is not very happy right now. And this patriarch is a direct line. And the New Testament spends time talking about that. That the promises made to Abraham preceded the law. That they came before the law. And so Abraham's a more significant part of the story of Jesus than just about anyone, except for maybe one other character, which would be who? David, who plays a different role and a different significance. Now, what do we know about Abraham and his circumstances in life? And what did we just learn about Abraham? Maybe I should go to my first slide for this. What did we just learn about Abraham? Back in the latter part of chapter 11 that we finished last week, God tells Abraham what?
Take your family, your junk, take off, and I'll tell you when to stop.
Yep. He says, I want you to leave your home. This is where he lives, down here in Ur. This little area right down here. For those of you that are curious, this is the city of Babylon, modern city of Babylon. This area is what we call what? Iraq. So this is where he lived. He lived in southern Iraq. And he lived down here in Ur. Was he a wealthy man? Yes, very much so. And when he left home, he didn't just go with a suitcase. There was a caravan. It was him and his wife and all of his stuff and all of his servants who were taking care of all of his stuff. And then we found out who else came along for the journey. His nephew Lot says, hey, I want to go with you. And so Lot leaves with him, and they travel all the way up the Euphrates River. And they go first to Haran. And so that's what it says at the end of chapter 11. Terah took Abram his son, Lot the son of Haran, his grandson, and Sarai the daughter-in-law, and his son Abram's wife, and they went out together from Ur the Chaldeans in order to enter the land of Canaan. They went as far as Haran and settled there. And so I don't know how much time they spent living in Haran, but they got that far and they stopped, and they lived there for a while. Yes, ma'am. That is what's believed to be the case. Mainly because 2 of the 4 rivers that are mentioned are there. So he didn't know where he was going, and he was leaving his home where he was successful. By the way, how old was he? He was 75 years old when he left and headed out. So how old was Sarah, his wife? She was 65. That's going to become important in just a minute. Was he a young man? By whose standards? A good question. Now, ages had started to get shorter at this point. We made an observation of that as we went through the lineage. The age got younger and younger and younger where they begot children. We even had one of Abraham's recent ancestors started having children at 29. But Abraham's 75, and how many children does he have? 0. Why? Because his wife was barren. So there's all kind of interesting things at play here. But he's not a young man. By the way, how old did he live? Does anybody remember? I think it's chapter 25 when we find out. So you may not have read that far ahead. That's okay. But does anybody remember how old Abraham was when he died? He was 175 when he died. Okay? So he's still got 100 years to go. But he's not a young man. And he'd been living a long time. And he had collected a lot of stuff. I'm not even 75 yet. I've collected a lot of stuff. And I'm not rich. And he was pretty well off. And in fact, he was so well off, in just a little while, not very far forward in this story, what does Lot and Abraham have to do?
They have to go separate ways because of their property.
Okay, because their property is so great, their flocks are so great, their herds are so great, they're competing for pasture land. And what happens is the herdsmen, the servants of Abraham and the servants of Lot start quarreling with each other and fighting with each other about this stuff. And so they had to kind of separate and go their own separate ways to control it. They have a lot of stuff. This is not just 3 people and a couple of suitcases in the family sedan taking a trip. This is a lifetime's worth of stuff and servants and herds and flocks and all the stuff that goes along with it. All the tents and all the food and all the things that it takes to feed all these people. I promise you, when you saw them coming down the road, you knew they were coming. And so they get as far as Haran and they stop and settle there, it says. And then they get moved in this section that we're looking at, or we looked at the promise part of it last week, which is the first 3 verses. In this section, at the beginning of chapter 12, they get moved from Haran down to Canaan. Okay? Canaan is eventually going to be where he stays. He is not going to stay there this time around. He's just going to pass through. We'll see some of that in a moment. But we have to get a feel for the circumstances and what's going on. And so Ur is modern-day Iraq. We talked about that. Haran is modern-day Syria. And Canaan is modern-day Israel. And so he's not moving short distances either. And they're not flying. And they don't have motor cars. So how are they getting there? They walking. So it takes a while to organize and move, and they camp along the way, and it takes them a while to get to Haran. And when they get to Haran, they settle for some length of time. And it says in verse 4, so Abraham went forth as the Lord had spoken to him. Lot went with him, and Abraham was 75 years old when he departed Haran. So now God at 75 years old says, all right, you got to leave. It's time for you to go. So he's gone this way. I kind of suggested that he was 75 when he left Ur. That's not completely accurate. He's 75 when he leaves Haran. But he traveled that far and he stopped and he settled. And that just means he quit traveling. I don't know whether he was tired. I don't know whether he just liked it there. If he didn't know where to go. And so he just didn't go. But it says in verse 4 that the Lord spoke to him and tells him to leave Haran. So it says he took Sarai, his wife, who is now 65, as we noted, and Lot, his nephew, and all their possessions which they had accumulated, and the persons which they had acquired in Haran. So they even add on some more travelers. And they set out for the land of Canaan. Thus they came to the land of Canaan. Again, I don't know exactly how long it took them to travel. This is not about the length of time it took them to travel. This is about them going. Abraham passed through the land as far as the site of Shechem to the oak of Moriah. Now the Canaanite was then in the land. Now we're going to switch to this map. This covers all the way almost to the end of the story. So it's a lot more detailed. But at this point, what we just read, it says that they have come and they passed to Shechem. Now that is, let's see, what color do I want to do that in? I guess we'll do it black. That's this spot right here. Number 1 on this map. Can y'all see that? So they've gone up to Haran, which is up here off this map, and they've traveled down here, and they stop in Shechem. At the oak of Moriah, and the Canaanite was in the land. So this is the descendants of Canaan are living here at the time. Abraham passed through the land as far as the site of Shechem to the oak of Moreh. And the Canaanite was in the land, and the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your descendants, I will give this land. So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. And so while he was at Shechem, he builds an altar after God speaks to him and denotes that place. He worships God. That's what that indicates. And he worships God in response to being told what? This is the land that your descendants are going to be given. So God makes that clear. So at that point, does he settle in and live there? And notice God didn't say, this is the land I'm giving you, or this is where I want you to go. He says, hey, this is the land that your descendants are going to get. Then he proceeded from there to the mountain on the east of Bethel. And so he moves down here, and we have Bethel here and Ai over here. And right in between there's apparently a mountain between those two cities. And in that big black dot area right there, he goes to that mountain. in between those two cities. And he pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord, and he called upon the name of the Lord. And so he moves a little bit further. And again, pitching your tent. Listen, don't think about this being 5 minutes of pup tent. And this is a big encampment for him and Lot and the people that work for them and their families. And so they set up camp in this place. Then it says, Abraham journeyed on, continuing toward the Negev. You'll see that on the map right down here. What is the Negev? We'll pull this map up. Oops, don't want to get ahead. Pull this map up. The Negev is a desert in southern Israel. This is the Jordan River. This is the Sea of Galilee up here. This is where Jesus does a lot of his work until he comes down to Jerusalem toward the end. But he does a lot of his work up here in the region of Galilee. This is the Dead Sea. The desert area in the southern part of Israel is the Negev Desert. Now, why would he, if he's up here in the mountains of central Israel, why would he journey on and continue toward the Negev? And the first thing I'll say to you about that is, just because it's a desert doesn't mean it's evil. We have that idea. Listen, this was a really, really beautiful place. And these are some photos from the Negev region. And the one that I really want you to pay attention to is this one down here. If I can get this to work, it ain't going to work for me. So, oh well. I was going to blow it up for you, but my clicker's not working tonight. That's actually a spring in a canyon down in that area. This was a place that had plants, it had wildlife, it had water. It is desert, it is arid, and it's desert primarily because it wasn't highly populated. We would probably use the term deserted more than desert. Now, that's not to say there wasn't anybody there, but it wasn't very populated. Where he came from, urban. Haran, somewhat urban. Some of these other cities were cities. He's in an area now where there's not any cities, because there's not a whole lot of people living in that area. And so he goes down to that area. But as circumstances would have it, what's happening at this particular time? Look what it says. He went to the Negev. Now there was a famine in the land. So it just happened to be a time where there wasn't a whole lot of water available, and that made food very scarce. So it wasn't a good place for them to be. And where does he go? To Egypt. I don't know. I'll tell you this. I personally just notice that the first half of this journey, it says the Lord said go. And all of a sudden it quit saying the Lord told him to go. And it just says he journeyed to this place. And then when he got there wasn't any food. And so he went down to Egypt to sojourn there. The famine was severe in the land. It came about when he came near to Egypt that he said to Sarai, his wife, and this is the first incident that is well known in Abraham's life. Who wants to recount the short version of the circumstances to us? What's he do here? He's headed into Egypt, and he's leaving this place where there's not a whole lot of people, and he's going into a foreign land where there is a lot of people. And what's he afraid of? He's afraid that somebody's going to see his beautiful wife and kill him. He's pretty sure they're going to treat her okay, but he's concerned that he's going to be killed. Now, there's some commentary that discusses this. I told you it would come back and revisit us. She's 65 years old. There are some commentators that go, hey, she's 65 years old. How could he even think that she's going to be that big of an attraction to somebody that they'd be willing to kill him so they can take the 65-year-old woman? Well, the first thing I would say is he lived to be 175. I don't know how old she was when she died, but maybe 65 was still kind of young. Second thing I'll say is all it says is she's a beautiful woman. And it doesn't necessarily say that this somebody's going to kill him so they can take her because they want her as much as what we've been talking about. Abraham is an important individual. He is wealthy. He has a lot of stuff. And so if they kill Abraham and marry his widow, what do they get? Everything that comes with it. Have you ever heard of somebody marrying an old widow woman for money? Apparently that's not a completely new thing. He's concerned. She's a good-looking lady. She's not that old. He knows that they're not going to hurt her, but they might kill him. So he says what? What's his solution? All right, if they ask, tell them you're my sister. Don't tell them you're my wife. Now, again, later on in a few chapters, we're going to find out that they were, in fact, half-sisters, because he does this again, which is amazing to me. But I say that, and I bring that up now to make this point. He's not out and out completely lying. This is his sister. But he is being deceptive. Okay? And he's being quite selfish. He's trying to save his life. And this is the scheme that he comes up with to save his life. Now, I made it a point earlier to point out that the law had not yet been given. I don't know what kind of revelation that God had made to Abraham about how he should behave and whether it was okay to be deceptive like this or not. So I'm not going to be too hard on Abraham and decide that he is absolutely doing something evil. Beyond saying this, that the Egyptians who interact with him feel like he's done them wrong. But why do they feel like he's done them wrong? Well, and they kind of were held accountable by God just for what they did. But see, that's the problem. Their problem is, why didn't you just tell us that she was your wife? Why didn't you just give us there's an object lesson here that's kind of unrelated to the story that's worth making. Telling a half-truth isn't telling the truth. Which is why when you are sworn in as a witness in court, what do they tell you? They don't just say, okay, you need to tell the truth. What do they say? You need to tell the truth. You need to tell the whole truth. And that's what he didn't do here. He didn't tell the whole truth. And then you add to that nothing but the truth, because sometimes people add untruth. They have all the truth there, but they add enough untruth that you can't make sense out of which is which. That again is to deceive. So he didn't out and out lie, but he did. Here's my question in all of this account up to this point. This is a man who at 75 years old packed up and left home, a place where he had lived his entire life, and his family were there. All of his kinfolk were there. That was their land. And he leaves not knowing where he's going. And why does he do it? Hebrews 11 makes this perfectly clear. We talked about it 2 weeks ago. Why does he do that? Leave not knowing where he is going. By faith, Abraham left, is what Hebrews 11 says. He trusted God. He believed God. Even though he didn't know everything yet, all he had to be told was go, and he was ready to pack up everything and go. Where is his faith in God in this story? God's just made a promise to him. Verse 2, I will make you a great nation. And he says, well, if they see you, they're going to kill me. If they kill him, how's he going to be made into a great nation? Now you got to keep in mind, this is a guy who later on, after he waits another 25 years for God to fulfill a promise and give him a son, his son's born. He's 100 years old when his son's born. Then when his son is a lad, about 14 years old, most people think, God says, go up and offer him as a burnt offering. And he lights out and does it without a question. And Hebrews 11 comes in here as well, tells us that the reason why he was so willing to do that was what?
He knew God was even able to raise him from the dead. That's what it took.
God had made a promise that it was through Isaac that this promise would be fulfilled. And he knew that God would do whatever was necessary to fulfill that promise, even if it meant raising Isaac from the dead. Clearly, it took him another 35 years for his faith to get to that point. At this stage of the game, even though God's just made a promise to him. By the way, it was followed up relatively quickly when he was in the land of Canaan and he was told what? Hey, look around. This is the land I'm giving your descendants. Did he have any children? How was God going to give that land to his descendants if he was going to die in Egypt? Here's another object lesson for you. Worrying about things that we create in our mind, problems that we create ourselves, usually gets us into trouble. He's kind of forgetting that God is with him, forgetting the promises that God has made to him. And for a moment here, his faith begins to ebb. No longer is this the brave man who lights out on this journey not knowing where he's going simply because God told him to go and he would take care of him and show him where to be. No, now he's forgetting that God's just told him, I'm going to make a great nation out of you. By the way, this is where they're going to live. And he's immediately concerned about his life. What he's really done is he started focusing on the material. Now, let's not give him too hard of a time. He's only human. What do we do when we get scared and think our life's in danger? We try to preserve our life, and that's what he's doing. But it's very important to notice that all of a sudden the narrative doesn't include God told him to do this. Now this is him deciding, to go and sojourn somewhere, and him deciding how to handle things. And this is where it gets him, making mistakes, making bad choices. What it says is, verse 15, Pharaoh's officials saw her and praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. Why? Because verse 14, it said they saw that she was very beautiful. He treated Abraham well for her sake. He gave him sheep and oxen and donkeys and male and female servants and female donkeys and camels. He even got more stuff. But the Lord struck Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. What plagues? I don't know. There are a lot of people who make suggestions that maybe it was some type of physical illness that prevented him from acting in a way that would damage the wife. The relationship, the marriage of Abraham and Sarah. I don't know if that's what it was. I don't know if it was just a lot of things. It kind of smacks a little bit of foreshadowing into something that God would do many years later with his descendants when he delivered them out of Egyptian bondage. How did he do it? By bringing great plagues upon them. But God is clearly saying, okay, whoa, I'm not going to let this happen. That's what's clear in this. And so Pharaoh calls Abraham and says, what's this you've done to me? Why did you not tell me she was your wife? Clearly, at some point, he talked to Sarai, and Sarai spilled the beans. So he goes to Abraham and says, why didn't you just tell me the truth? Why did you say she's my sister? So that I took her for my wife. Now then, here's your wife, take her and go. And Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they escorted him away with his wife and all that belonged to him. So all that Pharaoh ends up doing is what? Escorting him out of town. Just say, while we're going, now there's a couple of things that are interesting to me about this. First off, we see that the Egyptians have respect for marriage, right? And Abraham knew that they had respect for marriage, that they wouldn't just ignore the marriage, that they would kill him. So they respected marriage. And when he found out that it was Abraham's wife, he was angry and felt like he had been mistreated. Why didn't you just tell me this was your wife? Here, take your wife back. I don't want to take your wife. She's a beautiful lady. And when it was your sister. Now, there's also one other suggestion that I think is a little bit worthwhile considering. Nothing in the text demands this, but there's a lot of this that goes on throughout the scriptures, and a lot of this has gone on throughout history. And I already mentioned Abraham was, even at this stage of the game, not your average Joe. And so it's very possible that the idea of having an alliance by marrying his sister was part of the mindset. That Pharaoh took her to be his wife to kind of make peace. And that's a very common thing for leaders to do. That's how Solomon ended up with how many wives? 700 wives. That's how he ended up with 700 wives. A bunch of them were simply marrying daughters of kings and stuff in other nations to build relationships with them. There was at least some scholars that suggested that maybe that played a role in why Pharaoh would have taken this 65-year-old woman as his wife under these circumstances and paid quite a generous dowry for her. But look, Pharaoh just says, look, man, you should have been honest with me. Here, take your wife back. I didn't want your wife. That's not what I was trying to do. And he never kills him, does he? He just leads him out of town. Now, would things have been different? I don't know. I'm not going to say that his fear wasn't rational. But we do see a picture into a younger Abraham where his faith was not always the first thing he thought about. We're going to see another event in his life where some decisions are made, not out of faith, but out of sight. And that's what all this is about, okay? Godly people walk by faith and not by sight. What Abraham's doing here is walking by sight. Ooh, wait a minute. They're going to kill me. Here, let's tell this story and maybe we can live. Actually, he knew his wife wasn't in danger. Let's tell this story and maybe I can live. Lie with me and help keep me alive. Now, all of that is said, and there's yet one other thing I want to bring your attention to in the 2 minutes I have left. Look at Isaiah 41:8. Now, this is much later. He's talking through the prophet Isaiah. He says, "But you, Israel, my servant, Jacob, whom I've chosen, the offspring of Abraham, my friend." And so God here says, Abraham is my friend. 2 Chronicles, chapter 20 and verse 7. "Did you not, our God, drive out the inhabitants of this land before your people Israel and give it forever to the descendants of Abraham, your friend?" And there's talking about, of course, the land of Canaan that has now become Israel. And you drove out all the inhabitants. You gave it to the descendants of Abraham, your friend. We are introduced to this language of Abraham being a friend of God. James talks about that as well. James chapter 2, verses 21 through 24. "Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered up his son Isaac on the altar?" You see that faith was acting along with his works, and faith was completed by his works. And the scripture was fulfilled that says Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness, and he was called a friend of God. And what this tells us is that the reason he's called a friend of God is because of his walking by faith. Okay? So we need to understand that we're dealing here with someone who walked by faith, and that's why he's known as a friend of God. I want to read one more quick passage. I know I'm kind of out of time. John 15 and verse 14, I believe it is. When Jesus says this in his teaching, "You are my friend if you do what I command you." That's what made Abraham a friend of God. Is when God said go, he went. And when God said offer up Isaac, he offered up Isaac. And when God said he did what God told him to do, that's what made Abraham a friend of God. His faith in God and his faith in the command of God. But just because he was a man of great faith, and to the extent that God called him my friend, does not mean that he did not have days when the world got in between him and God, where his flesh got in between him and God, where he was more concerned with what's happening right now today than what God promised me later. And this is a demonstration of what the proverb writer would write when he says, indeed, there's not a righteous man on earth who continually practices righteousness and who never sins. And the point to be made in this for me and you is we need to make certain we don't lose hope and confidence in ourselves just because we have a bad day and we do things that we ought not do. How do we respond to that? Repent and seek forgiveness. And keep going. Keep walking with God. And that's what Abraham does. Thanks for your participation and your comments.
Wonderful story of love. Tell it to me again. Wonderful story of love. With the immortal strain. Angels with rapture announce it. Shepherds with wonder receive it. Sinner, oh, won't you believe it? Wonderful story of love. 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 Though you are far away, wonderful story of love. Still he doth call today, calling from Calvary's mountain, down from the crystal bright fountain, e'en from the dawn of creation. Wonderful story of love. Wonderful story of love. Wonderful story of love. Wonderful story of love. Wonderful story of love.